Hi, everyone. My name is Chelsea Elena, and I am an attorney with Neighborhood Legal Services of Los Angeles. And tonight I'm going to be doing a workshop on some education issues that I've seen come up pretty frequently with my clients. And I thought I would share this information with you. I know that with distance learning happening right now, there's a lot of challenges that aren't normally yours to deal with. You're home, you're educating kids, you're dealing with students with special education needs, you're trying to understand, the content that your students are learning. And so Neighborhood Legal Services is here to support you. Tonight, we're going to be going through some question and answers based on some questions that keep coming up in my work with my clients. If after you watch this evening, I don't get to your question, feel free to email me. My information is at the bottom of this slide, and I would love to support you with any questions that you have related to distance learning or education issues in the Antelope Valley broadly. All right, so we have a fairly short agenda tonight. I'm going to start with providing some updates on just the law coming out of the state related to distance learning. We're going to go into those questions on distance learning related to special education, discipline, and mental health. I have some resources. So in the first update I want to give you is something you may have heard about, which is cohorts. You may have been hearing this word being thrown around a little bit. Back in August, the state gave school districts permission to allow small groups of students or cohorts with serious learning needs to return to school for face-to-face instruction. This is probably good news for some parents who have those students with those serious learning needs, because it means that you're finally going to be able to have your student, if you're comfortable, start attending school in person with peers and getting educated by a teacher. This unfortunately isn't open to all students as of yet, but if you think that your student would benefit from a cohort, you can always ask your school and district to be considered. The timelines for when these cohorts will start in the Antelope Valley have changed several times. So I don't want to provide you with any assurances for when these will start in your in whatever district your student attends. But if you want to reach out to us, we've been following up with districts and may be able to give you some specific updates. The second update I have is related to timelines for assessment plans and records requests. You may remember that back in March, there was a law that was passed by the state. It was called SB 117. And this law was very much a reaction to schools closing for COVID and educators not really knowing how to proceed when it comes to all of these requirements that the state and federal government have with how to educate students, especially students with special education needs. So this law ended up relaxing several special education timelines and requirements because of the pandemic. Some of these California timelines that were relaxed were the right that you have to receive an assessment plan within 15 days and the right to receive records within 5 days of a request. The good news is that this law expired on July 1st and it was not renewed. So all of the usual timelines that you've come to expect by having a student in California, those are restored and you can proceed as normal as if there wasn't a pandemic. The last update is that schools in LA County no longer need support from parents, teachers, and other employees when they apply for a waiver to reopen an elementary school in Los Angeles County. So before we even get into this, I do want to say that these waivers have been around for a couple of months, but previously they required some extra letters of support in order to be considered, and they only apply to elementary schools. So if you have a student that attends middle or high school, this information isn't for you. But now, as of this week, all that districts in California need in order to get one of these waivers to open an elementary school is proof that they've consulted with parents and staff, and then they can submit that application. Now, I'm a big supporter of teachers' unions, and I definitely think that everybody deserves to feel safe when they're at work. And there have been some concerns from teachers' unions about how districts are going to keep teachers safe given all of the risks that are associated with teaching during a pandemic. But the other side of that is that this waiver rule previously tended to benefit students who could afford private schools or independent schools. And I read that over 90% of these waiver applications were that's where they were submitted. So now any school, any elementary school can apply to this waiver. It's important to remember that LA County is still very much impacted by COVID. It is still on, I'm not sure if you've seen those colored tiers that the state's using to kind of sort counties into categories based on how they're still being impacted by COVID. We're still in the highest tier in LA County, the purple tier. And so in terms of schools reopening for all students, schools cannot reopen for in-person learning until the county has been on the next tier down, the red tier, for 2 weeks. And that's with the exception of these elementary school waivers and cohorts. All right, so let's get into the meat of this presentation today, which is some of your questions. The first question I want to talk about is distance learning. I've just been hearing from so many of my clients that it's just not working for students with disabilities. And I keep getting like, what should I do? This is a very understandable and all too common sentiment, and it's shared with me often. Even if you have a teacher or a school that's trying their best to form connections with your student over Zoom or make sure that your student is learning, you as parents and caregivers are shouldering most of the burden, from sitting next to your child for hours to printing and setting up their homework and activities, to keeping up with their schedules and services. It's a lot. I know it's a lot of work and energy, and it may feel like your student still isn't learning, or worse, they're regressing. Studies have already shown that COVID impacts vulnerable students, like students of color, low-income students, and students with special education needs most of all. The frustrating thing about distance learning is that it's not going to be ideal for most types of learners and will certainly be more difficult to adapt for students with special education needs. The thing that's more frustrating is that solutions that the district or school or you may come up with may not work or may not work right away. It's hard to accept that one of the keys here is just having constant communication with teachers, your school, and your district. You have to keep trying new solutions. And it can be hard, like that's what we have to do right now, because trying new things, it takes time. It could cause you and your students to feel frustrated, and it's just painful to watch your students struggle. But the fact is that in order to show that distance learning has not worked for your child, and because we really don't have any definitive idea what's going to happen with compensatory education or makeup services once this is all over, being in communication and trying to find solutions that will work for your kid can help to show that you tried to make distance learning work and that the education program that your school provided was never sufficient to offer your child an appropriate education. So this means that you have to communicate constantly with your child's teachers, your school, the district. If they miss an assignment, you have to reach out. If they're not wanting to attend classes, you got to reach out. If they're not wanting to get the most out of their services, you got to reach out. You have to keep trying new solutions after the last one doesn't work or stops working. If your student has an IEP, schedule an IEP every time you need to amend how services are delivered or to add more accommodations. This, I'm sure, is a hard recommendation to hear, but it is a recommended strategy given all that we don't know and how the Office of Administrative Hearings has been ruling on due process cases during COVID. Along with trying new things is a recommendation that I've been giving my clients since schools first closed back in March, and one that attorneys across the state have been recommending, and it's record everything. I cannot overstress this enough. Use a log, use your phone, make videos, record voice memos, do whatever you can to keep track of your students' progress or regression during this time so that you can use it as evidence in IEP meetings or when the time comes to have discussions about compensatory education. I cannot overstress this enough. Record services, record progress, record contacts with the school or district, record your students' moods, record everything. And we have logs that we can send you if that's helpful. You can send me an email after you watch this presentation and I'd be happy to send you something. Another big issue that has come up with Zoom, with distance learning, especially for students with special education needs, is Zoom fatigue. We are asking our students to sit for multiple hours a day staring at a screen and working largely alone. Students are understandably getting worn out from this, and it's obviously not as effective as working in a classroom with their teachers and with their peers. I think there are two strategies here that you can try. The first is to once again schedule a meeting, either an IEP or a conference, to discuss your options, and then get a schedule for when your student can take breaks away from the computer. In terms of options that you can discuss with the school, some things that I've explored is having your students' assignments or some of your students' assignments get sent to you so that your student can complete them using a pen and paper to give them a little bit of a break from doing assignments on the computer. You can ask that the school give you special permission so that your student can keep their camera off. And we're going to discuss Zoom cameras more in a minute. You can also ask that classes be recorded for your student to watch on their own time when they need time away from the computer during a time where they're scheduled to meet with the class. Really, I think scheduled time away from computers are key right now. It's a lot of screen time that we're asking our students to have. Once your student is done with the computer for the day, pack it up and have them spend time away from screens, reading a book, cooking, exercising, you name it. The next question we're going to talk about is an issue that has become more common as distance learning has progressed, and that is that students are being marked absent for turning off their camera, or they're being disciplined in some other new ways since school just looks differently now. I've heard that students are being marked absent. Students are given no credit for the day despite being present in class. Students are being kicked out of Zoom meetings or being forcibly muted for disruptive behavior. Students are being informally suspended from Zoom classes. I'm sure there are more that people are experiencing out there, and please contact us if your child's experienced any of these things. But the problem with schools needing to keep track of attendance and participation is that even though we're on distance learning, school funding is still tied to attendance. But on the flip side, being able to turn a camera off is an important part of student privacy. There are plenty of valid reasons for a student to not want their camera on. Not wanting to see not wanting people to see inside of your house or your room, feeling like you're on the spot when the camera zooms in on your face when you're speaking. They may find it more difficult to focus with the camera on. The fact is that there is no state requirement that students have to attend classes with their cameras on. But the state does give districts the freedom to be able to define for themselves how participation is going to be measured. If your student feels more comfortable engaging in a class with the camera off, once again, this goes back to the first recommendation, communicate with your school. If your student has special education needs, you can ask that an accommodation be put in their IEP or distance learning plan for them to be able to turn their camera off. If your student doesn't have special education needs but still works better with their camera off, talk to your teacher to see if participation can be shown in some other way, like work completion or sending a daily email or chatting in the chat box or asking questions during class using the microphone feature instead of the camera feature. If your student is removed from class, from coming to a virtual class, this is very, very much akin to a teacher suspension. And the education code has some requirements that teachers have to use if they're going to use this. The education code allows teachers to suspend a student from class for that day and for the day after based on their own discretion. But they have to follow this process. They have to report that suspension, and it is a suspension if they're removing a child from class. They have to report that to the principal and allow the student to be able to speak to the principal about what happened. And the second thing is they have to inform you that they have removed your child from class and they're preventing them from rejoining, so that you can join a conference as soon as possible. So there has to be an opportunity for your student to meet with the principal has to be notified, and two, you have to be notified and you have to have an opportunity to attend a conference. If your child is getting removed from class and they're not getting these protections, please contact us. All right, next question. I've talked to several parents whose students are experiencing anxiety, depression, or other mental health issues. This is a tough time on all of us. Now that we've been, on distance learning, attending classes online and at home for several months, I'm sure the novelty has worn off for your students. And many students who have traditionally dealt with anxiety or depression are now experiencing the same issues again online. And many students who even haven't dealt with these issues before may start dealing with them now. So there are a couple of strategies that you can try if you notice these sorts of mental health issues starting to come up. The first is it's open communication is really important for all students, especially K-12 students. And even more important if your student is experiencing these emotions and they're new to them. So a huge part is acknowledging their feelings and talking about them openly and honestly. While this is not an ideal time and sometimes we just have to feel our sadness, it can help students to cope with new or stressful feelings of anxiety or depression if they feel like it's normal and like they have a safe place that they can come and talk to you and they know that you are someone that they can come to for answers or just for someone to listen. Again, this goes back to recommendation number 1 is talk to your student's teacher or the school. If your child has an IEP already, there's a possibility that counseling services could be added to help deal with distance learning related stress. If your child already receives counseling, inform the service provider so they can work through these feelings, or increase the amount of time that they see your student to allow time to work through these sort of pandemic related mental health issues. If your student doesn't have an IEP, you can consider asking that your student be assessed to see if they can get counseling services through an IEP or even sometimes get to some capacity through a 504 plan. You can also ask that the student meet informally with the school psychologist. A big thing, we've already mentioned this before, but we need to work in breaks into our students' days to where they can rest and get away from the computer and into activities that they enjoy, like exercising or talking to family and friends or relaxing. Mental health breaks can do wonders for anybody, but especially a student who's stressed or anxious. The last thing I will say is it may be important right now to consider getting outside help. Often insurance companies will cover professional therapy or psychiatry, and that may help get your student through these mental health issues that are surfacing because of COVID. All right, next question. A question I've got is that some parents are seeing because they're at home with their students, they're seeing their child's grades a lot more frequently than they used to, and sometimes there's a concern that they're better than they expected or they're worse than they expected. So grades can sometimes be a good indicator of a student's ability and what they know, but often they're more of a reflection of whether or not they've completed their assignments on time or whether or not they've participated. The root of the concerns for both the parent of the kid who is thriving and whose grades are drastically improving and the parent of the kid who's struggling is the same. How do I know if my child is learning anything this year, and will they be behind when we go back next year? The answer is to look at learning outcomes. These can be found through the state standards or through goals and skills that you can ask the school for. They're also found on the Department of Education's website. This will help to determine whether or not your student is working on material that is appropriate for their grade level and whether they're making progress from previous years. Also, most districts are using an online grading portal. I would suggest you use it. Download the app, check it constantly. If you see a missing assignment, ask about it. If grades are dropping, schedule a conference immediately. If your student is doing very well, then use those learning outcomes to make sure that they're getting assignments that are challenging so that they don't get bored and won't be frustrated when they return to school and go back to their to classes that are at their normal level of difficulty. You're gonna have to be a lot more vigilant with assignments and grades than you're probably used to, just given our circumstances. All right, this is our last question for today, and it is a big one. I get this question constantly. What is happening with special education assessments? The long answer is that most schools stopped assessments completely back in March. Some school districts continue to do like limited triennial evaluations through records reviews or rating scales, but most in-person or initial evaluations were stalled. Now, there were never any waivers from the federal government regarding assessments and timelines, like initial assessments when they requested or triennial assessments every 3 years to reevaluate. And although California did waive some timelines from the last year, those waivers were not renewed. And so there is no justification for an outright refusal to assess at this point. In the Antelope Valley, it seems that most assessments have been restarted at least virtually. Some districts are starting to do in-person assessments or parts of in-person assessments on a case-by-case basis. Most assessments, with very few exceptions, can be done validly and reliably over virtual technology. The assignments that cannot be done virtually are the ones you're going to need to discuss in-person social distance options with the schools. The important thing to remember is that in-person assessments are perfectly legal right now. Private evaluators, regional centers, they are evaluating kids, and virtual measures do exist in alignment with professional guidelines, but in-person assessments are legal. I don't know of an Antelope Valley district that has suspended assessments entirely, but if they refuse to do any assessments virtual or in person, you can ask that the assessments be completed by a non-public agency or see if the school will agree to an independent evaluation with an assessor who's willing to complete the virtual or in-person assessment. There are some pros and cons to having students observed during virtual classes, which many assessments require. A parent is often with the student to help, normal accommodations aren't present, classroom triggers or peers, those aren't in play, and so if you're looking for certain behavioral triggers, they won't be there. There's also a lack of individualized instruction during virtual learning right now, but allowing a student to be observed in a virtual class, with this really being the only option right now, makes assessments possible and can allow your student to get increased services and supports if or qualify for services faster. You can talk to the evaluator to see if you can videotape behaviors that you're seeing during class or independent in the event that the behaviors that you're seeing but don't happen during the evaluation take place. All right, that comes to the end of our question. I have some resources to share that may be helpful for you as you're working with your students at home. The first is tutoring. So the LA Public Library is offering free online tutoring, including homework help and SAT, ACT tutoring through Princeton Review. All you need is a library card and a device, and you can actually apply for a library card, I believe, online. And tutoring is available every day from 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. That's a fantastic resource because you're actually going to be working one-on-one with a tutor. There's also several virtual educational experiences. The LA County Library is offering a ton of digital resources that you can access at any time with a library card. And again, you can apply for a library card online. And these resources include ebooks, audiobooks, magazines, movies, TV shows, homework help, online classes, and like new things are being added all the time. PBS has a free TV program for students in grades pre-K through 12, and those are aligned to state standards. And that's available for free at certain times of the day, depending on the age of your kid. Scholastic has free online resources for students of all ages during distance learning. Amazing Educational Resources has a large list of education companies that are offering free subscriptions to academic resources for students to use. And Mind Research Institute has a no-cost math instructional program that offers targeted support for students in grades kindergarten through grade 8. For resources in specific service areas, the speech therapy store has hundreds of free downloadable speech activities separated by area of need if you feel like you need some extra activities to sort of supplement the services that are given by the school. And then the speech pathology group has lists of resources separated by area of need in speech, OT, and behavior. And that includes support for students with autism. And these are like research-backed activities and materials that you can use to support your student if you feel like they need some extra guidance while they're at home. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording.